Hello and welcome to another edition of Here's the Pitch here on YouTube and wherever you listen to these great podcasts. Hopefully you think they're great. Hopefully you've come here for the Howard Stern content. There will be more, so if you are coming, I promise you, join me as I'll be adding some new Howard Stern interviews coming up very, very soon. So keep subscribing, keep liking, and keep commenting. Hopefully you're enjoying some of the Howard Stern content. There'll be more added to that playlist of my Howard Stern playlist of interviews coming up. But today on Here's the Pitch, I want to bring in my friend Chris Gough. Used to be a writer for the WWE back in the 90s, the glory days of wrestling, in my opinion. Hello, Chris.
Great, Brad. Haven't seen you in a while, but it's nice to connect via the internet today.
So I will explain to my friends and fans here on YouTube and podcast world. Chris and I worked together on a project. I think in 2005, we went to Kansas and Kansas State and did some football spring game stuff. We had a blast. We had so much fun. And then we never really talked to each other. We would text and whatever. And then Facebook, Facebook's amazing. And it shows you when people's birthdays are. And it was Chris Gough's birthday this week. Mine is next week. And I said, I've been meaning to ask Chris about his career back in the day, but when do you have a chance to sit down and talk about someone's career like this? But you had a pretty cool career. So happy birthday, and thank you for joining me again, Chris.
Thank you very much. I'm 29. That's cool.
Is that how you remember our chance meeting?
God, you have a better memory than me. I do remember that now that you say that. Vivid memories are rushing back of that just stellar Kansas football team that we covered. That was back when Fox Sports Midwest they were doing like about a lot of spring, like sort of previews, right, for these football schools. And you got the luck of the draw to come out to Kansas and Kansas State in the middle of nowhere. And, actually, Mangino was there. So Kansas was actually still semi-relevant. But, I remember that.
Didn't Mangino offer us some spaghetti, like a dinner? And I kind of remember him going, hey, you guys want to eat? And maybe he took a shit and maybe he showed us his towel after. Wasn't that his thing that happened?
That is one of my favorite stories to tell everybody, how he uses a towel after he goes to the bathroom, he uses it like a saw blade underneath his, crotch and just throws it on the floor for the team's facility guy to pick up.
So that is a great story. I was telling you, though, but we worked together, but I never really got a chance to talk about your background and how you got into the WWE, WWF at the time. And I was amazed by it. I was always curious about it because it's such a cool gig. It was something as a kid I was like, boy, I would like to be Michael Cole or Jim Ross someday. So it was one thing that I always thought about. So tell me how that started. You said you're an intern. Tell me just the whole background. How do you end up working for Vince McMahon?
So I went to University of Missouri and went to broadcast journalism there. Knew I wanted to do some in television and sports. If I would have known then what I know now, I would have just done a business degree and just done some podcasts on the side, just like everybody else has a sports ID.
Is this a shot at me? Wait, was that a shot at me?
No, you were actually in it. I'm talking about when you actually work for a legitimate television station and then you sit next to a guy that had, joeschiefsblog.net and he's got a press pass just like you. I'm like, why'd I go to school? Anyway, rant over on that. But I went to Missouri after my sophomore year. I was taking broadcast classes. One of the kids that was in my class said, hey, Chris, do you like the WWF? And I was a fan. I can't say I'm like in the 80s. I wasn't. I was a big fan, not a super uber fan, but I loved wrestling. I did. And he goes, I said, yeah. He said, well, my parents live in Norwalk, Connecticut. And at the time, I had no idea where that was, but it was near Stamford, Connecticut, where WWE was. And he said, my mom cuts hair for some of the people in the human relations department, human resources. So he goes, if you want an internship, I think we can go and you can live with me and all this. I'm like, okay, great. And then ended up a couple months later, we had applied. He's like, hey, my parents are moving to Minnesota. Sorry, man. And he bails. I'm like, well, crap. So I get this call, and it's from a guy named Matt DeLuca, who was an awesome human resources guy for WWF at the time. And he said, hey, do you want this internship? I saw you were a fan. We don't really like it when you say you're a fan when you apply to WWF. But regardless, you have a good resume and stuff. Are you still interested? Of course. So I asked my parents. It was a non-paid internship. And at the time, Brad, the only place I could find to live up there was in this realtor's basement. It was furnished. It had like $50 worth of furniture in the entire place. It was a complete, shithole. But it was at the time in 1997, $1,500 a month, which was crazy to me. I mean, I was paying at Columbia, we're paying like $450 a month for a 4-bedroom right at the time. But anyway, so I ended up going up there and interning in 97, and that's what started it off. And it was at the television studio. Up there, you had the WWE Titan Tower, which everybody sees on TV still. And then they had their television studio was a couple miles away. Their facility at the time, and still is, state of the art. And it was just that was when internships, Brad, were when they were like, hey, kid, I want a roast beef on whole wheat and some Cokes. Maybe if you get this right, I'll let you watch me edit the show later. I'm like, okay. Nowadays, as you know, if you don't let the intern get on camera, it's forced labor, right? So anyway, that's how it started.
Yeah, I got McDonald's for Trey Wingo at Channel 5 a lot. That was my big, hey, go get me a double cheeseburger. And Trey still remembers that. So you're interning there, and it leads to you becoming a writer. So how does this turn? How long are you in? I mean, do you intern just for the semester? Do you get to stay? A lot of times and this is a part of this podcast, I've had talks with people like this. And it's like, get in there and then stay and just try and work your way in. All the guys that I used to work with at Fox were interns who just worked hard, came in when they didn't have to, and you just see them every day and you're like, oh, we need a guy, let's hire Tim, let's hire Alan. So tell me about how that worked for you.
Well, I tell people that all the time. College degrees are great. Get them. They're not worth as much as they were 20, 30, 40 years ago. But internships will get you your first job and intern somewhere you really like. And that same thing happened at Metro Sports in Kansas City. Everyone that worked there was at once an intern. So you're right. So I interned in 97, and then I went up every break after that. I found other places to live at that point, had some friends up there. So started full time there right after college in 99. And at the time, I had started working for WWF.com, and Shane McMahon was my boss. And at the time, looking back, I mean, I was 21. Shane was like 30. So Shane is my favorite McMahon by far of all of them. He is by far the nicest, most genuine guy.
Well, who's your least favorite then? Let's go there.
Oh, definitely Stephanie. Can't stand her at all. She led to my demise, and
well, we'll get to that. I was going to have some fun with it, but go on. Tell me more about the early days.
Well,
I like to go chronological.
I understand. Shane McMahon was a great boss. At the time. This was when, I went to the internet side because that's where it was all happening. That's where everyone's going. Everyone's going to be, streaming everything. This is in, late 90s. They're still having some buffering problems now, but it took a long time to get that up to speed. But WWE at the time was doing a ton of video content on their website, and I was a video producer. They had a video show on there called Bite This for many years, and I was the producer of that show. And our hosts were Kevin Kelly, who is now calling action for New Japan, or he was recently, and also Dr. Tom Pritchard. And Howard Finkel was our sort of weekly guest. So I was very sad when Howard passed away a few months ago. But anyway, did that show, and it was awesome. The best part about doing that show is that it was still the weird waters of what's a work or what's shoot in wrestling, meaning if you're not familiar with those terms, that means on this show, do we act like what's on TV is real, like storyline wise, or do we sort of get a little bit more behind the scenes, which is what everybody loves in wrestling now? They like the gossipy behind the scenes. It's more entertaining than what's actually on television. So Stone Cold and Shawn Michaels both said some pretty derogatory things on those shows, and they both got in deep trouble for different reasons. Shawn came on, and he basically said he was friends with Triple H. He had said at one point that Triple H worked a lot harder than The Rock, and The Rock was handed everything, and that did not go over well with The Rock, who had a lot of stroke, obviously, because he's the biggest star in the world. And then Stone Cold was on there, and we had him on after he was very upset. If you recall, Brad, he walked out because he didn't want to lose to Brock Lesnar. Not because it was Brock, but because there was no build-up. It could have been a bigger deal. He was at the age where he thought he should have not been thrown into something at the day of.
Let me ask you about that. Yeah, I want to ask you. So did you know that he wanted to come on and unload a little bit? Because you can find this piece on YouTube, and I think maybe even WWE Network. But yeah, he left because Brock wasn't gonna. He didn't want to. He's like, there's no build up. But did you know that night that he was going to come on, or did he just? How did that work? Do you book him? Do you call him and say, hey, we want to have you on, or does he call and say, I want to be on? I have some things I want to say. How'd that go?
I had to get. You had to go through different. You had to go through the right channels to get them on. But at the time, again, Vince was sort of ignorant to the internet at that time, just because it was so new, and he didn't really understand what would be happening in that corner of the world. He's so immersed in everything else. So you could get away with a lot more stuff. Wild, Wild West at that time. So yes, we knew that he was going to be sour, and we always tried to be a little cutting edge on there because, we tried to make the website a little bit more, not just generic, just storyline feeder type stuff. So we had him come on knowing that he was upset, didn't know how much he was really going to say. Is he going to stay in character? Is he going to walk the political line? But he didn't. And he said some pretty bad stuff. He said the creative writing they were horrible. They didn't know what they were doing. They were doing a horrible job. Nothing against Brock, but he just went on and on. And after that, we had Vince McMahon came on the week after that because Vince, we made one of my buddies that ends up being my closest friend out of that relationship of working up there. He did this report every day called the WWE online report or whatever. And he every morning would get in before Vince and he would go through and scan every news website. And he would talk about all the stuff that, that was the rumors out there. And, it was a daily thing. Some days Vince wouldn't think about anything about it. And some days the smallest thing would be a huge deal and we'd all have to pay for what was going on. But this thing was Stone Cold was huge. So Vince actually asked to come on Bite This, which at the time when you're 22, you're like, this is huge, So Vince came on and he sort of...
Can I stop you for just this? Can I stop you? I all of this is so surreal to me to think that Vince owns this company, but he asked to come on a show that he runs the... Hey guys, I have something I want to say. Don't you think Vince could just stop everything and go, all right, get that off. I'm coming. But that's funny that he's like, hey, can I be a guest on this show? I love it. Go on.
Well, Vince is my second favorite McMahon, only because he is the good cop to Stephanie's bad cop. But Vince is he is respectful like that. He doesn't show. I didn't see Vince angry that often. He usually is very internalizes it for a while, and then you'll figure it out through other cycles how much trouble you're in. But yeah, he was disrespectful, and he came on and he refuted everything that Steve said in a nice political way because he knows Steve was one of his golden geese. So, but it was fun. That was what I did for the first couple of years, and then it turned into a point where my buddy and I were huge fans, and as you know, Brad, and I understand how these people now, and it's a little different now, but at the time, everyone wanted to be a TV writer for Raw or SmackDown or whatever. That was the pinnacle of a wrestling fandom, and that's what my friend and I wanted to do. So we told Shane, hey, we would like to go do this. And Shane's like, well, sort of like a manager in the major leagues, you're going to be hired to be fired. You understand that? We're like 23. We're like, yeah, we don't care, So might as well do it. It was a dream job already at that point. I guess if I lost it, it's all downhill from there. But we wanted to try it. So we talked to Stephanie. She told us had recently been put in charge of creative at the time of television writing. And she told us to give her 2 10-page storyline arcs with characters that were on the show currently, just something new that we could do. And we had to submit those. And then a few weeks later, we were both put on the writing team.
So this is going to be, I was going to say 2002 is when the Steve Austin thing happened. So tell me what did you pitch? Everyone does fantasy booking if you read any of the websites. So what did you pitch? Because I'm trying to think back then you had 2002 is one of my favorite underrated years. And it was my last year of really being, because you had The Rock and Stone Cold, but Hulk Hogan showed up and Kevin Nash and the NWO, Ric Flair. Like you literally had this changing of the guard too, because Stone Cold and The Rock are gone by 2003. Now you got Brock and Kurt Angle. Anyway, I digress. What did you pitch?
I'm trying to remember. One was Ric Flair and David Flair. There was a storyline there where David was trying to get the respect of his father. I remember that was one just germ of an idea. And then the other idea, I believe, had something to do with Shelton Benjamin, who I thought was underutilized at the time, which he always is underutilized athletically, but he just could never really cut a good promo. But I mean, I worked on these big time. I mean, they were something that you talk about stress when you're 23 and you're being asked by Stephanie McMahon to submit 2 storylines to see if you can get in this inner circle with Vince. I mean, it was a huge deal. I remember me and my buddy his name is Seth Mates. We would bounce these ideas off each other and just read mine, see what you think. And he had one about, I know what I had. I had one about Mick Foley and his son Dewey being kidnapped. I remember that. And it was, so I was way more into I liked the soap opera-ish storylines that,
Were you there but I was going to say, were you there? I mean, it seems like Russo was gone by the time Vince Russo, the head writer, he was gone by this point. He left in 99s, but you probably were kind of built on that, which is what he was pretty much, he was doing Crash TV, I would say, but it seems like that's what you were thinking, going for.
Yeah, it was a little bit of that. It was Vince Russo had left, and I was there literally like 2 months before Vince left, and Vince and Ed Ferrara were there, but we barely saw them, and like passing in the cafeteria at the tower at the time when I was first starting at .com, but they had moved on pretty quickly after that. Wrestling, Brad, has been hurt by many things. Political correctness has hurt wrestling a lot. To get a lot of quote unquote heat in the business, you have to say a lot of bad, negative things about someone's weight, their looks, their background, if their gender, their race, even for many years, their nationality. All these things are completely off the table now because of the way the world is. So it has definitely hurt wrestling. Some of these storylines they try today, I see. And when they try to do like a 3-way sort of love angle thing, that worked way better with like Triple H, Kurt Angle, and Stephanie than it does like Rusev, Bobby Lashley, and Lana. And I think part of that is the crowd now. Brad, it's weird to think, but the people watching the show now were not ever born in a world of kayfabe, where they believed it was possibly real. So when they see a fake love storyline, they just call it out right away on the internet, and it ruins it all. So it's really hard to be a writer now, I think.
So you get the job though, right? Because whatever you did worked. So tell me a little bit about, this is 02. I guess I was so interested in the semantics. So tell me how many writers there are. Are you writing for Raw? And tell me a little bit about what goes into this as now you're in that room.
Yeah, so we definitely were both picked to be on there. I think Seth and I were as creative as anyone on there. And as I tell anyone that wants to be on that writing team now, you find out pretty quickly that it's a complete collaborative effort. Even if you had the greatest writer in the world walks in that room, he's never going to get anything from A to B without it being just slaughtered 100 ways to Sunday. So when we walked in there, the brand split had just happened. So it was just Raw, and then now they're going to Raw and SmackDown because SmackDown had just started. So he decided, WCW goes out of business, ECW's out of business. Now WWF is the only kid on the block. So he decides, we're going to make our own competition, a brand extension. So you're going to have Raw on this side and SmackDown over here. So they cut the rosters and the writing teams in half. So the SmackDown writing team was my buddy Seth Mates, David Lagana, who's been in the news recently, Paul Heyman, and Bruce Pritchard. That was the SmackDown writing team. And it was basically 4 people, which now I've heard there's like 20 people on each show now, which would be very watered down and not nearly as much fun as we had. The Raw writing team was myself, Brian Gewirtz, Ed Koski, and Michael Hayes. So it was pretty cool walking in and having sitting in the writers' room with 8 of us in there, and it's Michael P.S. Hayes, Paul Heyman, and I loved ECW, and of course Bruce Pritchard he was in Texas. His wife was having some medical issues, so he would call in a lot, and he'd be at all the TVs and stuff, but he wasn't actually there a lot. But he would be on all the phone calls, and and every week, dude, we would pitch. Stephanie would be in there, but we would pitch directly to Vince every Wednesday. So he would just. Actually, it was on Thursday was Raw, Friday was SmackDown. So Thursdays we pitched to Vince. He would come in after a workout because he works out 100 times a day. That's real. And he would walk in and sit there and be eating a power bar, and we'd send him our first draft of Raw, and he'd just sit around this table and he would just pitch segments to him. Like, I was the low man on the totem pole, so I was pitching I was like women's division, some of like low card guys, some tag team stuff. Brian Gewirtz was the head writer for a very long time there. He works for the Rock's company now. He wrote a lot of the good lines for the Rock, and the Rock's obviously given him, a job for life, I'm sure. He was the main event guy at the time. He was friends with a lot of the top guys. A lot of people like Brian. And Ed Koskey is still there. I mean, he's been there for 20 years. 20 years on the writing team at WWE is like 100. It's like dog years. I can't believe he could be there. But Ed's good at staying below the radar, which I was not. Neither was Seth.
So this meeting happens on Thursdays or Fridays for either brand. So you've obviously had your show. The storylines are already sort of built. So now what are you doing? Like, what you guys are pitching your segments, trying to get, all right, let's get to the next week. And pay-per-views are coming. I mean, you have to. I'm just trying to get this. How much is being written? Like, is it? You're formatting 10 segments, 10, 12 segments for a 2-hour, 3-hour show at that point. But you're writing what they're saying? I mean, are you putting the promos out there, or does that come on Monday? Give me a little bit about that.
Well, let me give you the weekly schedule. These are years that my parents referred to as my lost years because it was such a blur, and I was always on the phone, and I was constantly worried I was going to get fired. I mean, that was sort of the environment. I hear it's still like that. So on a pay-per-view week, you have a pay-per-view on Sunday. So you would either fly out Saturday or Sunday to the pay-per-view town. You'd have a pre-show meeting of the pay-per-view. Which would consist of the agents getting assigned to the matches that they're going to have, what's going to happen in each segment, all this. Maybe some rewriting. There's always rewriting going on. We would fly. So this is a cool thing. And I appreciated it even then. But, of course, I didn't. You'll never fully appreciate all these things until you're older. But I'm 24, 23, 25, right around there, flying on Vince's corporate jet. And the people on the corporate jet are, myself. There's the people I talked about, the 8 of us plus Vince and Stephanie usually. Triple H I'd get bumped on, I'd fly commercial back because it would be Triple H or JR, someone would kick us off, and me and Seth would, be a commercial, which was completely obviously fine. But just being able to do that was amazing. You had these, steak dinner every day, and I would never drink on there because if you ever got drunk, you'd be in deep trouble. But like Vince was drinking, a lot of people drinking and having a good time on this thing. But we'd rewrite the show on there as well. So you get to the show, do the pay-per-view, do that. You have a post-show meeting. Fly to Raw, same exact thing. Fly to SmackDown, same exact thing. Come back Wednesday's like fly back time. Get back in the office, get ready because you're pitching the Vince tomorrow. Then you pitch the Vince on Thursday. SmackDown would pitch on Friday.
Let me ask you this. Let me stop you. So Monday, if let's say a pay-per-view happens Sunday, Monday, do you have to really do much because you've written the show, but maybe someone gets injured? I mean, is it pretty much you've already kind of figured out where you are, so you're always kind of a week ahead, right? I mean, that's pretty much.
Yeah. So the Thursday pitch to Vince, you're pitching for this coming Monday. So you're pitching, and like you said, on a 3-hour show, then it was 11 segments. So we'd all be assigned like a few segments each. This is not a knock on Vince. This is how anyone would be. He really worried about the main event stuff, and then the other stuff, just hope it didn't suck. But I mean, he didn't really care if I had, Spike Dudley. I have him taking on Chris Nowinski. I mean, he didn't care about that. He would care, obviously. Well, what's Stone Cold? What's Rock doing? What's Brock doing? What's Taker? All this stuff. That's what he cares about. Which obviously that's the money, so that makes sense. But the rewriting of that. Yeah, the segments are, yes, here's the match, here's the finish. Before that, though, I'm going to have Kurt Angle walk out there, and the gist of his promo is going to be this. And, and at the time, everything might be pitched, and you would walk out of that room, and Vince would be like, it's great, let's do Monday, whatever. And then you get on the plane, and he'd be like, yeah, I was thinking about it. I don't think any of this works. And I'm like, oh, crap. Okay, so we'd rewrite it, and then like Monday, you'd rewrite it again, and then you'd have the show, and then you'd be like, we should have just did what we did the first time, And I'm like, and it was just constantly like that, That's why I've heard Bruce say this a lot. He likes live shows because you can't go back. Like SmackDown was even worse because you'd have to go and post and like redo everything that he didn't like that actually happened. So at least with live, it's done, So, but that was fun. But yes, you're pitching on Thursday for that Monday show. So in a perfect world, yeah, you're all ready to go until it gets rewritten to death, and just the minutia of it just gets. The detail of Vince is obviously what makes him great, but it also is like a super hindrance in many ways too. So that was, and on Saturday, as I was going to end up the week this Saturday, you'd have a conference call from 9 a.m. And I was on that phone sometimes till 3 in the afternoon on a conference call at my house. So Saturday's your off day, but you're really just chained to your phone at your house. So, it was a young man's job. I would hate that job at 40. And, if you wanted a family or anything, you'd never have one. But it was a very fun job.
Yeah, and so what you're doing is, how often are you thinking ahead? I mean, do you in my mind, if I had this job, which is something as a kid, I think I would loved. I think in my head I had this. I will tell you a little story about my life here that I probably shouldn't tell people, but me and my cousins created this fake, let's call it wrestling sumo league, and we found people that were a little bigger around the neighborhood. And but then we found people anywhere we'd go. Like we'd go to Raging Rivers in St. Louis, and we'd see a few people, and we'd call them the Raging Rivers. Or we'd see someone over working on Grandpa's house, and he's a really big guy. We call him the Black Block. And then we would create storylines and write them out and had them going against each other. So in my head, I was putting this stuff together. How far ahead are you thinking for your storylines? And are you like grouped to, like you said, you're more of the lower card guys. So are you picking like 10 to 12 guys and just saying, all right, I'm going to try to, like you said, Shelton Benjamin or Spike Dudley. I'm going to work on getting these guys 12 weeks of stuff and building the marks. Someone telling you this, or is it, hey, this is my baby. I'm going to try and get these guys over.
So, at that time when there's 4 or 5 on each show, of course you want to get as far ahead as possible. But again, the minutia of the work week gets in the way of like long-term planning all the time. Now, long-term, like it is true. At that time, Vince was going mania to mania. So he would be like, okay, we're trying to build to Rock Austin next mania. So how are we going to get there from here to there? And the overriding storylines that were looked at, months and months in advance. We would work on things. Our goal was to have, if we had tag team women's lower card main event, our goal was to have 6 months in a somewhat of a shell of a format. Like what are we doing the next 6 months paper? Because at that point you have a pay-per-view every month. So what are your main events all the way up there? 6-man tag team, whatever kind of gimmicky match in this match, and then find the blow off in Mania or whatever. You would have a shell of that. But I'm telling you, the most frustrating thing, and again, this is a creative process, and Vince is second to none on his success. But, like, for example, I always bring this up. Eddie Guerrero, we had months of Eddie Guerrero as a heel, Latino heat, just being that was like lie, cheat, and steal Eddie Guerrero. We had 6 months. We were all ready, very excited. And then we were in El Paso. And Eddie's hometown is right over the border. And gets a babyface reaction. Everybody loves him, right? So after that show, Vince is like, God damn it, did you hear that? He's a babyface. So we're like, no, he's just getting that babyface reaction because it's here, And he's like, well, no, I think we need to change him babyface. And so we just, take all of that work and just throw it out the window. And that happened a lot. I mean, that for many reasons, injuries, the people, listening to the people in certain towns that you probably should, I'm not saying Vince McMahon isn't a very brilliant man. He is. But there was just some things like that there's just, when you're in that bubble, and they loved it when like myself or new people would come in because you're walking out from the real world into this bubble. They're like, tell us what you think, because they're like, you're not in here in our world. So we want to know how the perception is out there in like regular world. And they liked that for a while, but then you get in so involved in the mechanics of everything. You're like, you just become that after a while. And that's just everywhere, It's very easy to walk in and not understand anything of how the sausage is being made. Just tell people how to make sausage. But, you would just get bottlenecked up big time by so many different things. And a lot of times Vince is a very listening kind of guy. And the last person to talk to him won a lot. So that would change a lot as well.
So tell me about promos. We know today they literally script them to the word. I think they read them off teleprompters now because there's no audience there. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that back in your day. Did Brian, I know you said Brian was helping The Rock. Were those as scripted? I mean, it sounded like there was more of just get this point across. I'm going, I'm stone cold. I'm coming after you. you're Rudy Poo Candy ass, whatever. But how scripted, and do you write those yourself?
Yeah, so it depended on the guy, and it's way more so now. It's interesting now that we sit 15, 20 years away from when I was there to see how it has evolved, because when we were there, of course, everyone was bitching about how it was all scripted, and it was way less scripted than it is now. Scripted now is like verbatim everything. It's like robotic, monotone, and a lot of reasons for that. See, I consider the time that I was there, I was there from 97 to 03. That's really like the last sort of, in my opinion, golden age of wrestling. But you had the Attitude Era, and you had the birth of a lot of guys that were sort of still in the very tail end of the territory era. So like even like Dave Bautista, the John Cena's, the Randy Ortons, these guys at least had a little bit of the taste of like making $20 and a hot dog to wrestle, as opposed to like the factory now at the Performance Center, where I understand what they're trying to do, man. Vince has this set up to where you have a factory that you get the 21-year-old athletes in there, you get them primed up, you get them out there when they're 23, and they might be done when they're 26, and like, let's keep it going. Problem is, they all sort of seem the same. They're all pretty similar. None of them know how to work different crowds because they just haven't been put in those positions yet. A lot of these wrestlers that were awesome in the Attitude Era were 35 years old by the time they were great. Rock was an exception. Of course, he's an exceptional person in the world of everything. But, Stone Cold was 35 when he hit it big at WWE. A lot of these guys that just – Shawn Michaels was – his best years where he was older. Bret Hart, he didn't start cutting a good promo until he was almost 40 years old. And that anti-America stuff was the best stuff he ever did. So, the promos at the time were, Stone Cold, if I would have given Stone Cold verbatim this stuff to say, he would have laughed his ass off and, ripped it up and said, yeah, I'll see you later, whatever. Rob Van Dam, he's a guy that wanted it, like, tell me exactly what you want me to say, because he didn't want to make anybody mad. Some people were like, bullet points, that's what I want. Some people were like, just write out everything and I'll memorize it. It was all across the board. You sort of gave them, and you knew who Vince was going to give a little bit of rope to and who he wasn't. And, because some people would go off the rails and just be out there for way too long. Like, there was several times where that happened. And Rob Van Dam being one of them. Rob Van Dam went really long on a promo once on Raw, and there was this whole section of time there where when they introduced the second world championship, the big gold belts, and it was handed to Triple H. I was there during that time. And we wanted Rob Van Dam to win the championship. This was September of 2002 at the pay-per-view. I think it was Unforgiven. And, everyone was in unison wanting this to happen. And Rob cut a really long promo, went long. That was sort of one strike. And then Triple H got to Vince at the end and said, I think it would mean more if he chased it longer. And Rob Van Dam was never a world champion there for, I don't think he ever was. Maybe later. I don't recall. They changed it a lot after that. But yeah, that happened all the time. It did. So promos were fun to do with guys that knew how to do them. But a lot of guys then had a lot more experience doing them than they do now.
I like your Vince McMahon impression too. It sounds like Bruce doing his Vince McMahon impression, which is as good as Vince.
If you're in a room with them like that weekly, it becomes a caricature. When they have the Firefly Funhouse stuff, and it's like, that's good shit. He says that all the time. He does say that. And so when you hear it, it's of course become like a joke, and it's bumped up a little bit, but not much. That's how he is. He's a character, man.
So you mentioned Stephanie, not your favorite. 03 comes to an end for you. Give me a little. I'm going to go out of chronological order because I still have a few more questions. Hopefully, you have some time. I know you just had a hot tub delivered. Congratulations on that, and a happy birthday.
Dude, you need to go jump in that. Yeah.
But so Stephanie obviously becomes the head of creative there. Tell me a little bit about the end for you and why she's your least favorite.
My friends and I have discussed Stephanie a lot, and like just the psyche that she must have at this point. I bring this up as a father, and you being a father now too. You think of like you always want your kids to have a better life than you have. That's like the thing that every parent says, and it's really hard to not just. It's hard. I think just anyone's hard to not spoil your kids to death. Stephanie and Shane were born, multi-millionaire children, and one of the richest areas in the world, and so obviously their just demeanor and everything's going to be way different in life. I'm always thinking, my general thinking of Stephanie is that she's always looking for her father's love and respect, because she was put in a position at a very young age that most people couldn't handle. It's a crazy, fast-paced world. She's a female too, which at the time was, we had not evolved to where we are in 2020 either. And she has the sort of the demeanor of her father in some ways. She can just stare a hole through you, and Vince can do that too. Shane is not like that at all. Neither is Linda. You can tell it's like Shane and Linda are very similar, and the other two are similar. Shane was more. I always thought. I just always assumed after Stephanie started being with Triple H and she were not married with him when I was there. They got married a year or two after I left, but they were dating at the time, which was sort of awkward for that family to go through. One of the boys was Stephanie. But I just, we just clashed a lot. And I think it's funny, me and Seth had a pretty good relationship with Vince. And the reason why we did is because we were young and we were single and had nothing better to do. So we would go to the gym at 1 a.m. And WWE has an awesome gym. And it's still the same. I saw it on that match where they were wrestling at the pole match. What's it called? The ladder match. The one they went through the. Did you watch it? They went through the entire Titan Tower. It just happened.
Undertaker? Was it Undertaker? Not Undertaker. It was, I don't...
The one where they raced through every floor of the Titan Tower to get up to the top. Money in the Bank match is what they called it. But they went through Titan Tower, and they still had the gym there. It was my long way to get to that point. The gym looks exactly the same. And Vince would be there, and we would talk to Vince all the time, and he was super into working out, and he was super cool in this environment of not board meetings, and he was very cool. And he knew us to a degree as being young and nobodies. And so we could talk to Vince in ways that, I don't know. I'm not saying we're Bruce, but we were just young and stupid. I look back and we were just very, just naive to what the real world was at that point, because we were 23, 24 years old. So I was talking, and when they would ask me questions, and this happened multiple times, my point of getting fired after several of these was that they would ask me a question, and I would look around the room, and my thought is, if one of us doesn't answer this question, we're all going to be in trouble. But really, everyone was smart and not answering, because if you don't answer an environment like that, you won't get fired. But if you answer it, and it's not the greatest answer in the world, it will be a check mark against you. And that happened several times with me. The last being, we had a meeting with TNN. Okay, and so there was a small period of time where they left USA, WWE did, and they went to the National Network, which they were trying to rebrand after the Nashville Network, and this was before Spike. So the executives from the National Network coming in, and Stephanie was like, I need you guys to talk to these people and tell them what you think. And, they're going to ask questions, and please be honest, answer them, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. And she basically said, if you don't answer them or talk to them, there will be hell to pay. So, okay. So they come in, and they were nice people, and they had asked, one of the first questions was, why don't you think we're getting as good of ratings on TNN as we were getting on USA before? And this is after they kicked the ECW was on TNN before then. And they were off then, and WWE got that contract. And of course, the reason was pretty obvious, and I should have not said anything, but I did. And I said, well, it's because, you guys have done an awesome job rebranding from the Nashville Network, because that was a channel that my grandparents watched the Statler Brothers on every week. But now you guys are rebranding it to this sort of a man's channel or whatever they're calling it before Spike TV. And, I just think there's just not enough awareness yet where it's at on the dial. They were on channel, in New York, USA was channel 8. And TNN was channel 72 or something. It was really high. No one knew that. There was USA had billboards, People Magazine, full page ads. They had a ton more money just to blow on this kind of stuff, and TNN didn't. I mean, it seemed pretty obvious, but I felt like if I don't say something, we're all in trouble because no one else was talking. I shouldn't have said any damn thing. But anyway, I remember that happened. We did the meeting. Stephanie pulls me aside afterwards, and she's like, how dare you talk to our partners that way? And I was like, what? Like, I had no idea that this was a negative at all. And, she said, we invite them here, and that's the way you talk to them. And believe me, I was not being disrespectful. I was too scared to say anything disrespectful. But a couple of days later, man, the HR person knocked on, and I knew her. Her name was Palma Braxton. She's like, Chris, can I see you upstairs in the third floor conference room? I'm like, oh, it's over. It's over. The ride has come to an end. But and I was very upset, man. Super loyal, as we all are to our first jobs, especially our dream job. I would have never quit that job. My friend Seth had quit like 3 months before because he saw the writing on the wall that if you're outspoken in any way here and try to make a difference, you're going to get probably thrown out pretty fast. So he left. And it was his dream job too, and I couldn't do that. I just couldn't. I mean, I'm sure you understand. If you got a job with the Cardinals or whatever your dream job may be, you would not. It would take a lot for you to be like, I quit, But so I just couldn't do it. So she did it for me, and it ended up being a great thing for me. But it was a fun ride, and it was an interesting having your dream job when you're in your low 20s.
That's so cool. And like I said, I've never gotten to really just ask you these questions, and it's really an interesting conversation. So I appreciate that. Just a few moments. So what was it like when we talked about Stephanie and Triple H? I mean, doesn't everyone just see what that is, right? Everyone can kind of... Stephanie becomes an on-screen character, and right away Triple H is with her. Everyone knew that Triple H was sort of kind of wanting to work his way into this business. What was he like to work with? I mean, everyone saw him kind of coming through, and he's not really as influential. I mean, he still is in 2003, but now obviously he's the next in charge. Tell me a little bit about just working with him, and just was there a lot of people going, "Oh shit, we knew this was going to happen"?
There was definitely a sibling rivalry at the time. I don't think Shane was super at the time. I'm sure he's come around and loves him to death now. But at the time, it was not seen as like good for business, I don't believe, as far as, it's hard to have a person like that. And Triple H was, I don't know, like he's a great performer, and he's a top level star in one of the top eras of wrestling history. But I never really thought of him as Stone Cold or Rock level. He's like a level below that to me. He always had awesome matches with those guys, but I don't know. He definitely deserves a coveted spot in wrestling. But when they were, we would be on these phone calls, and Stephanie, like I said, that conference call would be every Saturday. And we'd all be at our respective houses. And, Stephanie would talk, and Stephanie wasn't at the time like really throwing out a ton of creative stuff. So, she didn't really have to. She's the boss and whatever. But she would talk every once in a while and take off on mute, and she'd talk, and she'd hear something, and then you'd hear, and he's like with her there, and he'd be like, yeah, and I'd be like, okay. And so we saw more and more of that. Okay. And it's just going to happen. It was just natural. He's going to be in charge. He had a lot of stroke. I think Vince saw, of course, as we've all seen it sort of play out. It's interesting. Vince saw that Triple H and Stephanie were going to be sort of the next creative / television people taking that baton, and Shane was doing a lot of business side stuff like Linda does. But, I think the coveted spot, of course, the heralded one, is the side that Vince has that he's going to give to his daughter.
Who did she replace at that point? I can't remember. Was this a new job, like head of creative? Because
it was a new job created for Stephanie just because she was there. There wasn't. I mean, Vince had left. Vince Russo had left, of course, and there was a lot of like talented writers there before. There was always like people, like Bruce was around, or Pat Patterson was around, or people that had been there years that could sort of be the leader of that and pitching to Vince. I mean, at the time, it was more of a, as you know how that works in corporations, it was a structural addition that wasn't necessarily needed, but it happens when you're growing and you just need more titles somewhere. And of course, she's going to get worked in. She's part of the family. That's what any of us would do with our children. And you put them in a position, whether they're worth having there or the worst person in the world, it doesn't matter. They're going to be there. So she was given that title, and she had Triple H was pretty obvious they were together after that storyline that turned into a real thing. And, so I think everyone respected Triple H's mind. But the problem is like, I ran my own little company too. And the only thing I can compare on any level of this is I never made myself an on-screen character, because it's really hard to be creative with yourself when you're the boss and you're the guy paying people, but you're also like making yourself sort of a star, and like you're always going to be perceived as the guy trying to put himself in that position. And that's obviously what Triple H was doing. If you had anything that he didn't like, of course, that he didn't want to do, he could get out of it. And, it's counterproductive in a way from a creative writing standpoint. But I mean, again, it's reality, so you had to deal with it. But I don't think anyone necessarily loved it. But now he's going to be, I've always talked about him now. NXT, of course, has been like the sort of underground, people rave about it. Like, Vince is out of touch. Can't wait till he dies because Triple H is going to just walk right in and make this thing awesome. I don't think so. I just don't. I think he signed a ton. Like, when I see NXT, he signed a ton of guys that were really good on the indies, and puts them in matches and makes it a little bit different, makes it grittier and more wrestling appeal, wrestling, less character stuff, but that doesn't necessarily sell on you don't get a $1 billion deal with NXT like you would with Raw from Saudi Arabia, or where it's just not going to happen. So this has turned into a money-making business thing for content, as opposed to the hardcore wrestling fans wanting their old school wrestling back. Now it's become a much bigger deal, actually, after going public.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy. I don't watch it anymore. Everyone looks the same. Roman Reigns looks like Braun Strowman. They all look. I mean, obviously one's taller, but they, like, your day, you had Goldust and Godfather and Val Venus would come out, and people would be just. I mean, this is 15 minutes into the show, and here comes Val Venus, and the place pops, and it's just every guy you cared about, even if they weren't in the main event. And so it was creating the character. I guess that's what's missing most, is that, and you kind of don't want to be 1989 where you got the big boss man and Hakeem and, the over the top characters, but you still had characters. I don't know. I don't know how that in my head is like, as I try to recite, I'm like, well, what could they do? I mean, they had to push. I mean, really, The Rock became The Rock just on his own necessity. He went heel after they tried to push him as a big. Stone Cold just said, screw it, I'm just going to be myself. But now these guys are like, well, I'm going to be myself. Well, yourself is not, you're not Stone Cold. You're not The Rock. To me, it's very hard to figure out how to get where they were. But it felt, maybe it was just one of those perfect storm things. Obviously, this is what I was going to ask you about. You had another company that was up their ass up till 2001 or 2000, basically, and then 2001 it goes away. What was it like around there when the Monday Night Wars are going on? Talk about just how often was Nitro mentioned in some of your meetings, and then as you guys get closer and realize, holy shit, he's buying it, and then it's over. What was that time like around that? You weren't writing, but you were in the building and you know what was going on. What was it? Sure. What was it like? I mean, were they literally looking at ratings every Tuesday morning like that?
Oh yeah, ratings were very important then. It was a competitive thing. We're all competitive in nature to some degree, and that was the measuring stick of it at that point. Even though whatever happened on Raw last night, that if it got a 5 or something and Nitro got a 4.7. That didn't necessarily tell the tale of why it did. It was probably because the last 2 weeks were better on Raw, and that's why it built up to that. It's not usually an instant gratification type of rating thing, as you know. But the reason why I think some of the reasons why you just mentioned before I talk about what it was like on the Monday Night Wars is that you talk about why wrestling isn't the same anymore. As I said, they're younger now. They don't. Their Stone Cold was awesome because he was 35 and like could have that kind of experience of life to be pent up and pissed and have these and be that way.
And I hate to interrupt you, but I was going to say this earlier. Look who's basically main eventing right now: Randy Orton, Edge, AJ Styles, 42, 43. I mean, any of the guys they have to bring back because it's like those were the guys who knew what they were doing. But to your point, it's like, you almost do have to just go through the minor leagues. But I did want to mention, it's crazy to me that you look and you see, oh, Triple H still has to go out. And this whole Undertaker keeps coming out because they have no one else to really push guys. But that was my
It's hard. Everyone likes to say that WWE can't make stars anymore, and you can argue that, definitely. But the problem is that the the last time they had major stars, like I said, you got some guys that will always rise to the occasion. Randy Orton wasn't in the minors for forever. I watched him in South Broadway over there during college over there in St. Louis. But he did have his father, and a lot of these second or third generation guys definitely have a lot more of that instilled in them than someone just coming off the street. But they don't have the experience. They don't have the necessary learning times to go to these different. We talk about back in the day, you go to Memphis, you're doing like crazy matches, but you go to Florida or Kansas City or St. Louis. St. Louis is going to be way more traditional wrestling, hardcore, like shooter style, not hardcore, but shooter style wrestling. And then, New York's different than California. You would learn how to just play up all these different things, and it made them such a more well-rounded person. Now they don't have that anymore. So these 22-year-olds they're just too inexperienced. And also, you talk about everyone looks the same. That one thing that creeped in like the 90s into the 2000s is the UFC. Like everyone in UFC was so popular. So then it started being like, you're not going to have the Val Venus gimmicky stuff. You're going to have, I'm Randy Orton, I'm tough. I'm Brock Lesnar, and I'm tough. Everyone's tough, tatted, head shaved. Look at UFC. UFC is boring now to me because they all look the same. UFC 1 through 10, awesome, because you have sumo guy taking on the kickboxer, and that was very interesting to me. A guy, tatted, they all look the same. As far as a wrestling guy is concerned, it's not as entertaining to me anymore. And so the gimmicks are dead. To me, the way to fix that, I've always told this to my buddies now, go back to the kid stuff. Go back to like 1987. You're going to have to build it back up from the ground up. They'll never do that because they make too much money now, and I understand financially why they wouldn't do it. But I do think if you went back to gimmicks again of like sort of Saturday morning cartoon wrestling, and then the kids watch that, the parents have to go take their kids, and then it just sort of starts blending in with each other, and it's not sort of like UFC light now where your target audience is like, the ECW crowd, which is like a small audience, but small but loud. And they, the adage of guys living in their mother's basement when they're 30, that's sort of like who watches wrestling now to a large degree, not families, right? So if you want that, but they'll pay more, as you can tell. If people now pay more, they have more access to wrestling, so they will pay hundreds of dollars to go to a show as family that has like 4 kids, and I need to pay $10 tickets to go. But anyway, the Monday Night Wars was awesome. I was at WWF.com. At the time, like I said, we were still trying to find our niche. Are we shoot? Are we work? Are we trying to work with storylines? Are we talking about stuff happening outside the business? Now, all the guys working in WWF.com at the time were all like my age. They were all 21 to 25, 26 years old. So young attitude, understanding the internet at that time. There were specific times when we would all watch Nitro, like when the Ultimate Warrior returned to Nitro to take on Hulk Hogan. I mean, those kind of things. And he's another guy. He went like 30 minutes over in his promo segment there, and it just ruined the entire show. We would watch those things, and it was hugely competitive. At the 97, I always say 97 is my favorite year in wrestling. Just so much awesome stuff happened that year. On both sides, all sides, ECW too, WCW, WWF. But it was a fascinating time to be there because everyone, like you said, the world was like, I just remember things that happen now as a parent. I look back, I was like talking to my parents at 23, 22 years old, telling them like, no, it's okay. Mark Henry, he found like this gal she's a trans, and like, he found out she had a penis, but it's just all in fun and games. It's like it's adults. They're not doing it to kids. All this stuff I'd say, all the stuff that I used to talk about Venus with the porn stars and just choppy pee that everyone remembers that, like all these things that were crazy. Now I look back and I'm like, yeah, I can't believe that. Like I was trying to say this was okay. I would never want my children to ever be around this now. But at the time, it was just so fast paced, and reality shows were super new. And that kind of like you call crash TV was just popular at the time. And they really did well off that.
So do you have, can you text Vince? Can you call Vince? Can you get Bruce on the line? I mean, how connected are you with these guys still at all?
I still talk to people like I got reacquainted with Bruce when he first started doing his podcasts. because you remember at the time I hadn't talked to him in a while. So if you could buy a shirt from him, he'd call you. So he called me, and he knew it was me. And so I have his number, and I've chatted with him multiple times now because I'll go to like the Cauliflower Alley Club out in Vegas and see if he's coming out there, or just say hi. I talk to Dr. Tom Pritchard a lot. He's probably still one of my good friends in wrestling. The reason why I got to know him so well is because at the time, before the Performance Center and everything, when I was interning at the television studio, you had the offices and the studios, but on the other side, you had the warehouse, the mailroom, all that, and the wrestling ring. So he would be out there training up and comers, like they were obviously top of the line. The first summer there, Drozdoff was there, Darren Drozdoff, and Sean Stasiak was there. Giant Silva, who was in the Oddities, was there a lot when I was there. And then they'd have Dory Funk Jr. and they'd do their Funkin' Dojos in this warehouse. It seems archaic now, but at the time, that's what they did. They were the top dog, and that's what they did. They didn't have a power plant; they had that. But Kevin Kelly I still talk to, and Michael Hayes. Michael Hayes once spent the night at my parents' house, and it was one of the greatest stories I tell people, just because having him and the whole picking him up at the airport bar and hanging out with them until like wee hours in the morning, and then him needing like roughly 45 minutes of sleep before he like pounces up acting like nothing happened, and he's having coffee, like 4 pots of coffee with my parents. That was a awesome story. And I could still pick up the phone and talk to him. Ed Koski, still on the writing team. I don't talk to him much. I mean, you don't have a life when you're on there. But thanks to Twitter and social media, I do talk to these guys a lot more. But yeah, I don't have Vince's number. I took that off.
Is he nuts? Is he a creative genius? I mean, give me your Vince McMahon bite-size biography for someone who's been in that room with him. Because someone like me, I'm like, that he's freaking nuts, man.
There's people that are just driven to be the best at what they do at any cost, and he's that guy. I mean, there's people we all know. Probably, I've met a handful of people in my life that you look at and they're like, he's the most competitive, driven person I've ever met in my life. I've met a few people like that. My dad is very driven. He had his own company and all that, but my dad would not sacrifice everything to be the best at it. And Vince is that level. I mean, it's sort of like, I put Vince up there with David Letterman or, probably Lorne Michaels or, people that are in these things that, Johnny Carson and Dave Letterman, you hear like their family, like I'm not saying this about Vince, but their families don't let their kids don't talk to them, all that stuff. Why? Because they live their job their entire life. And Vince did that. And Vince, to his credit, like his kids still love him, and like he sees his grandkids some, I'm sure. He talks about them, but there's that special kind of person, man, that you would just be like, I do have family, but I am going to be on the road for 50 years in a row and do this and be the best at it, and no one's going to surpass me. And the competitive level of that is just so unequaled by most people in this world, just because different priorities. I can't say he's wrong. I would never want to do that because I like taking vacations and seeing my family and doing stuff like that. He's just not wired that way, and so therefore you'll never outwork him. I've tried. I've learned things from Vince. I've done things in my own life that I try to be like him. Like anytime I have my own company of any sort, I always make sure that I do everything and can do everything and will do it to show anyone around me that you're not going to outwork me because I know how to do this. I'm not going to be the kind of guy that's like, yeah, like I don't know how to do that, but I own this place, so you do it. Vince knows how to do everything, and he works harder than anybody, and he doesn't sleep, and he does this all the time. So if you're just like 22 and Vince is 50 or something, and you're like, God, I just need like a weekend off. He doesn't have that, so it's sort of hard to be like, can't you just give me a weekend off? But I don't know. It's just wired differently. He's not crazy. He's just driven more than anyone you'll ever meet. I don't know why.
I've loved this conversation, man. I hope you enjoyed it. So you moved on. You went did some TV work in Kansas City. Talk about, if you want, what you're doing now and what you did you did kind of have a wrestling organization there for a little bit. If you want to talk about any of that stuff.
Yeah, it's just the only thing I did. Wrestling was such a big part of my life, and it just was like an formative time in my life there. That when I came back here and I started working freelance and then full time at an all sports station here in cable in Kansas City, and that's where I met you through. But I did that, like I said, I was broadcast journalism, so I worked there for 13 years or so. And at the time, I just missed wrestling, and I had a lot of connections there still. So I would run a little independent promotion around here called Metro Pro Wrestling. It was on the Kansas side, and I brought in a lot of old timers that I loved when I was a kid. The Demolitions of the world, and Jim Cornette, and these people came to these shows, and we would pack this like little rec center, and that scratched my wrestling itch, because after I got fired by Stephanie and moved back home, I didn't watch wrestling for like 2 or 3 years. I was just so burnt out, and I just couldn't do it. But I missed it after a while, and then so anyway, I went the traditional route of wrestling, then TV, then now I run a winery. So that's how it's now become a winemaker, and I get to do creative stuff with wine and the labels and have fun with all that. There's always creative stuff that you can do with things. And now I'm like literally a mile away from my house is the winery, and I have 2 young kids. Folks, if you're having children, there's a lot of pros and cons to having them young or old. But some of them are bad. I wish my kids were like 20. They could help me a lot more. They're like 10 and 4. So I have like less time to be driven like Vince McMahon, because I'm worried with them all the time. But it's I enjoy talking about my wrestling background. It's fun. I do believe that was one of the best eras to be a fan and to be working there. I look back and like see how lucky I was that I could pitch directly to Vince, and now I hear there's so many layers of stuff before, like these guys that work there now don't get that kind of FaceTime with them. Being able to work with someone like that, and just seeing how someone like that operates, and just it does motivate you to do things in life that you probably wouldn't if you wouldn't have met him. So I look back with the fond memories and a lot of great stories for especially people like our age that grew up, and just like, anytime I say that I worked there, they're like, did you meet The Rock? That you get that stuff. And of course I did. Yeah, he was awesome. Rock was one of the nicest guys in Hollywood. Now he's a nice guy in Hollywood, but Rock was one of those dudes that would remember your name. I mean, Stone Cold was the biggest star, bigger than Rock. He was in that world. Stone Cold wouldn't remember my name. Like he was, I would see Stone Cold walk into, into the television studio every once in a while, and he was like pulled in so many directions. Like it was hard to understand how that man could like function a normal life in any capacity in those years. He was just so damn popular. Rock came along later, and he would probably still remember me to this day. That's just the kind of dude he is, and that's probably why he has tremendous success, because he's just, he's a charming guy. He is. So, but yeah, I look back to him in fondness, and it's fun to talk old school stuff with guys that remember those days.
I do. You mentioned all the nice guys. Who was a jerk besides Stephanie? Who's the one you're like, screw him, I'm not riding for him?
Of course, I never could do that. I could never say that, but Paul Heyman was a huge jerk. He was. I grew up loving ECW, so when I went to live in Connecticut, it was on the MSG network at 1 a.m. So that's when I watched ECW, and I had never seen it before. I just heard about it, and I had gotten some pay-per-views. So when I watched it, it was just unbelievable, just because it's so like the hidden fruit, you just got to watch it, and it was so different and gritty and produced well for TV, and it's such a like cult level. But when you actually met Paul Heyman, like Tommy Dreamer, awesome dude. He's a friend of mine. I talk to him a lot now. Paul Heyman, huge jerk. I mean, like he was just, I never saw the creative genius side of him. He was a hell of a motivator, like that guy could talk anyone to do anything. But yeah, huge jerk. I loved Jim Cornette. I know a lot of people hate him. I love Jim Cornette. And I loved my favorite wrestler of all time. I think he's the greatest of all time, was Shawn Michaels. And I know he went through phases, but much like hair metal people and rockers before 90s and before, Brad, Shawn Michaels was awesome, just like those musicians, because a lot of those wrestlers were, because they were on drugs. So now they stopped taking drugs, and they're not nearly as interesting or cool or legendary. I'm not saying I want you to die, because I don't want you to die by taking drugs, but drugs definitely help make Shawn Michaels, hair metal bands, or bands before hair metal, and a lot of the guys that have all died at the age of 40 because of over steroid use. I remember those people tremendously, because they were freaks and they were messed up. Like, I know it's horrible to say, but that's just what it is.
Some baseball players too, I think back. Last question, because I have to ask, is there any story that I missed? Because I don't want to leave. I've kept you longer than I expected. I've enjoyed this. Michael P.S. Hayes in the bedroom. I know it's fairly, very funny and a great story. I don't want to leave without you saying something. Oh, yeah, that time Vince McMahon helped me spot and I went 300 pounds on a bench. Is there anything you may have missed or a story you want to tell before we wrap up our wonderful conversation?
Well, do you know Katie Vick?
I remember that storyline, yes. I know that's with the Triple H, and she was in the coffin, I think, right? And is that the...
Yeah, so my favorite stories to tell, some of the things that happened when I was on the creative team. Katie Vick, that was the girlfriend of Kane, who he killed accidentally in a car wreck. That's when we were doing background storylines. We did the Billy and Chuck gay wedding. And then we did this other one with Tori Wilson's real-life dad, Al Wilson, was in sort of like a love angle with Dawn Marie. And there was like crazy. And HLA, Hot Lesbian Action. I was there for all this like really weird, goofy stuff with Bischoff and all that. But my favorite story to tell is the Katie Vick story, because at the time, Kane was coming back from injury. He had torn, in real life, his tricep or bicep, one of the two. And he was coming back. Now, he had been friends with Lita before, like sort of girlfriends, sort of casually on storyline-wise. And we were like, so we were on one of those 5-hour conference calls one Saturday, and Vince is like, it's just Raw. It's just the Raw guys, because I was on Raw. And he's like, let's spend the next 5 minutes talking about how we're going to bring Kane back. I'm like, okay. So again, it was one of those like 5 minutes it was like crickets. It was probably 10 seconds, but no one was talking. Stephanie's on there. I just feel like I'm in trouble if I don't say anything again. So I said, hey, why don't we do a storyline that he's addicted to painkillers because he was rehabbing his torn bicep and she's trying to get him off these painkillers, Lita, right? And it was just an icebreaker, whatever. Don't think so. No. Okay. He's like, no one else really said much, really. And so then he goes, how about this? And so Vince lays out the story. And this is a time where it goes up and down, but Vince likes to go, at the time, Vince liked to go weaving in and out of, God damn it, we need to have backgrounds on these people. We need to know more about them outside, why they are who they are, stuff like that. And like you can see that come in and out of wrestling all the time. But this was one of those times where we needed backstory. So he's like, so Kane was disfigured in the fire that burnt him as a child. So he's only had one girlfriend that has loved him, even though he's scarred horribly and no one even wants to look at him. But this one girl, Katie Vick, well, at the time we didn't know her name. This one girl was going to take him to prom and stuff because she was the one that his one true love, and she loved him just for him, blah, blah, blah. And so they're driving to prom. It's a rainy night. The roads are slick. He loses control. He crashes the car and Katie dies. And this girl dies. Like, I'm just thinking they're like, well, yeah, okay, cool, whatever. And it's your company, whatever. And so what's really funny is if you remember, this is super inside baseball, but if you remember Raven's Flock in WCW, he had a guy named Sick Boy. Mm-hmm. And his real life name was Scott Vick. And Scott Vick was, when we were talking about doing low card stuff, I would always have a sheet of paper, we all would, of people that were in the minors, developmental league stuff, guys we could bring up at any time they were ready. Nick Dinsmore's there was a bunch of people at the time that could be brought up. And down there was Scott Vick. And Triple H was like, yeah, Scott Vick, he might be able to do that, And so we're like, okay, have you seen him? Well, yeah, I saw him. He's in pretty good shape, yeah. Okay, well, cool. So we're going to make it Scott. Maybe we'll do this angle with Scott Vick with Kane. And so that's how she got the name Vick. And then my friend always, this is his joke, it's a joke, but he said the only contribution that Stephanie ever made to creative was that she's like, I think her name should be Katie. So she became Katie Vick. And so Katie Vick was their name, and Scott Vick was supposed to be involved. So the funny part is that we get to TV, and Scott Vick's brought in, and Scott Vick looks like absolute shit. And so they're like, he's not going to go on TV. So no, he's out of here. So I was like, did Scott Vick even know this person's name as his sister in real life? And then, so then they went and Bruce and Stephanie and Triple H, they all shot this, and Brian Gewirtz, I'm sure, they all shot this vignette off-site to introduce Katie Vick. And the week before, Triple H had come out at the very end of Raw and said, Kane, I know what you've done. I know what you've done to that girl, and I'm going to tell you next week right here on Raw. And it was because he was going to say that he had killed Katie Vick in that car wreck. So the next week, Katie Vick is like, there's a vignette shown, and it's, Kane in a funeral parlor, and he like opens the casket, and it's a mannequin with Katie Vick's cheerleader outfit on, and he gets in the casket and starts a necrophilia angle here with Katie Vick. And then you see all the traditional like cartoon things like drilling and hot dogs in the bun, all this stuff. And then like he takes his mask off, and it's Triple H, and he pulls out like some gunk that looks like spaghetti or something, throws on the ground. He's like, I just screwed your brains out, Katie, And it was like super poor taste. How the hell did we go down to this angle? And everyone remembers it being one of the worst things ever, and it was horrible. It was sort of dropped after that because, let's see, we got Scott Vick's not even involved anymore. We went down this weird road in the funeral, and like, where are we even going with this at this point? So it goes Triple H and Kane obviously started something, but that's like, people don't really understand the seed of that was, so that's how it goes. If you go into a story in WWE circles writing, it starts with that and it ends up with that. And that's a typical thing. And so, that's a fun story to tell because everyone knows that story sort of wonders why the hell that ever happened. And that's why Billy and Chuck, they were the gay wedding. That was when Bischoff was the minister, and he had this awesome prosthetic stuff, and no one knew that it was Bischoff. So he's walking around all day, hey, how's it going? As the preacher, and they're like, hey, sir, thanks for coming. They didn't know. They did a great job. And then, the funny part is they went on like Good Morning America or something the week before, Billy and Chuck, and they accepted a gravy boat from GLAAD, who were like, thank you for progressing our cause, And then a week later at the altar, Billy and Chuck are like, what? No, we're not gay. We're not getting married. And like totally crapped on the whole gay thing. And that's disgusting, whatever. And so like GLAAD wanted their gravy boat back. They were furious. I mean, there's stuff like that happened all the time. And, since they went public, that kind of stuff is harder to do. I do think going public sort of was sort of a turning point, just because like you have a lot more people worried about what you're doing than if it's a mom and pop company. But it was those are the kinds of stories that happened, and they were all before I was 25. So it was fun.
What a fun trip down memory lane, Chris. This has been awesome. We may have to do it again sometime because I have more questions on this legal.
I can answer more questions,
but I think an hour is enough. I think I have to eat. I'm hungry. I think I've worn you out. You do this wonderful. You get into character right away. You could have possibly. I know you're a big strapping young fella. You could have possibly jumped in the ring, right? Did you ever?
I tell this story. Miranda Gordy, who is Terry Gordy's daughter. She is.
You didn't try necrophilia with her, did you?
I didn't. But she's made me think. I told her this story the other day. When Michael Hayes, I was 19. Michael Hayes met me at the TV studio, and I was a big kid then. He said, "Now I'm just going to tell you this once. Do you think would you like to be or try to be the next Terry Gordy?" And I was like, No, I don't need to wrestle. Like I can contribute, I think, in other ways than wrestling. So I'd rather not do that. Now, really, in my mind, I probably couldn't be that. I couldn't do that anyway. But secondly, I was just like, even at that age, I was like, are you kidding me? I don't want to have a broken back and be in a wheelchair when I'm 40. But that was flattering. He was nice asking that, but he did. And that was really cool that he even thought that he would even. I was just a piece of meat at that point, right? But anyway, so yeah, that could have, I guess that could have happened, but it didn't.
I wanted to be a heel manager, just that sniveling Harvey Whippleman, just sort of out,
Sure.
That's what I still could be. I think I'm still a heel. Again,
Still do.
well, maybe we'll do this again, because like I said, I enjoyed this. It's been 15 years since we've chatted this long, probably.
Well, oh yeah, if this long, definitely.
Makes me sad, but we'll continue. So happy birthday to Chris. I thank Chris, and thank you for watching. Here's the pitch. Again, sponsored by Masses Restaurants. 5 locations, stlmasses.com. Find their menus, directions, all the stuff you want to know about my favorite restaurant, my title sponsor. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.